Tonight, another major escalation in Donald Trump's trade policy. The blanket tariff on steel and aluminum, the president says, is coming tomorrow.
Including Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
As Trump doesn't deny his real desire to make Canada the 51st state.
I love the people of Canada. We have a great relationship. But if they became our 51st state, it would be the greatest thing they could ever do.
We try to do it as much as possible, but it is quite seasonal.
The challenges some are facing in a campaign to buy Canadian.
You'll have a different thought process when you're selecting a product.
And one couple's dream honeymoon ends with a nightmare travel ordeal.
Delay, and then it canceled the first flight on us.
Plus, born with perfect pitch.
My goal is just to make as positive of an impact on the world as I can.
The BC artist combining tenacity and technology to realize a musical dream.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. We begin with developing news and another major escalation in Donald Trump's overhaul of U.S. trade policy. The president says he is set to announce 25% tariffs tomorrow on steel and aluminum imports, including from Canada and Mexico. Responding on social media tonight, Canada's industry minister says Canadian steel and aluminum support key industries in the U.S., from defense, shipbuilding, and auto. This is making North America more competitive and secure. The president also confirming today his desire to have Canada as a 51st state is no joke. CTV's Jeremy Sharon starts us off.
Westbound to Super Bowl 59.
Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One today, President Donald Trump had some surprising new announcements on tariffs.
We'll also be announcing steel tariffs on Monday.
On this tomorrow?
Monday, yeah, tomorrow.
What countries will those go on?
Everybody, steel.
Including Canada and Mexico?
Yeah, any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
Reacting to the news, a senior government source in Paris with the Prime Minister says they'll wait to see something in writing.
Are you going to retaliate? Is Canada a viable country?
While the PM did not engage. In a social media post, Ontario Premier Doug Ford says this is the next 4 years, shifting goalposts and constant chaos, putting our economy at risk. During his first term, Trump imposed similar tariffs on steel and aluminum. Canada responded with countermeasures and eventually got an exemption. The president also targeted Canada again today to become a U.S. state.
Without the U.S., Canada really doesn't have a country.
And he isn't kidding about it. In a Fox News interview with Trump that aired before the Super Bowl, the president confirmed comments made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week about just how serious he is.
He was a private meeting. He said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is.
His national security advisor pressed today on Trump's plans as well.
I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau.
Trump also said today Canada's action so far on the border isn't good enough. More needs to be done during this 30-day pause. The contingent of Canada's premiers heading to Washington this week will certainly be looking to make progress on that front. Heather?
All right, Jeremy, thank you. For more on this, we're joined by CTV News political contributor and G0 publisher Evan Solomon. A lot to take in here, Evan. Canada was focused on that 30-day reprieve from U.S. tariffs, giving Ottawa time to beef up border security. That is not the case tonight, Evan.
No, once again showing Donald Trump is unreliable. He said there was going to be a 30-day reprieve. Obviously, now that's not true. Now, this 25% tariff on, if it happens, on steel and aluminum will affect close to 35,000 jobs, particularly for steel in Ontario, aluminum in Quebec, and it will be devastating for those industries. When Trump 1.0 did this, Canada retaliated, and we had a small trade war over steel and aluminum. And Trump 1.0, that if this happens, will happen again. But this is the thin edge of the wedge. This shows that Donald Trump says he's going to give a reprieve and then goes back. And this kind of unreliable presidential word and unreliable U.S. trade policy will put not just Canada, but all U.S. allies on alert.
All right, Evan, on the topic of Canada becoming a 51st state, well, on Air Force One today, the president referenced removing that artificial line between us. He is certainly not denying this is a real desire.
First of all, it's not an artificial line. It's called a border. And if anybody's focused on borders, it's Donald Trump. But this has gone from a joke to a taunt to now a policy. And I know the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had said behind closed doors, and it was on a hot mic, that Donald Trump is serious about it. And you should take a president both seriously and literally. What is he doing here? Yes, he's exhibited expansionism on Gaza, on Panama, on Greenland, and on Canada. For Canada, it's about economic force. And what's the first step? If you really are serious about that, destabilize the Canadian economy and make it vulnerable. And that's just what he's doing with these tariffs. Is this step one, or is it just more negotiating tactic? With this president, you have to consider both can be true.
Evan Solomon joining us tonight. Thank you. The Prime Minister, who has yet to respond to Trump's latest comments, is showcasing Canada's desire to strengthen economic ties with the EU while at a global artificial intelligence summit in Paris. CTV's Rachel Aiello reports.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spent his first full day in Paris among friends. Trudeau kicked off his official visit at a roundtable discussion on AI infrastructure, hosted at the residence of Canada's ambassador to France and attended by key representatives from Canada's 3 major AI hubs in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. There, the Prime Minister confirmed AI will be on the agenda when Canada hosts the G7 in June.
We will also be working to empower innovators like all of you.
Ahead of the conference kicking off tomorrow, the Prime Minister also spoke at a global AI partnership event about the need for nations to cooperate on developing the tech.
Because not just it's going to transform our world, but how we do it thoughtfully, deliberately, responsibly is being decided right now.
While some Canadian AI players are in town for the summit, those back home say they're keen to see what Trudeau commits to.
I'm watching to see where the various different nation states and sub-sovereign jurisdictions land on what's next. What do they perceive as the near future?
And while the Prime Minister's itinerary is AI-centric, the other major storyline playing out on this trip is the pressure Canada is under to strengthen trade and economic ties with the European Union. France and Belgium are 2 of the 10 countries that haven't fully ratified the Canada-EU trade pact known as CETA. Trudeau's trade minister got the ball rolling on this conversation in Brussels this weekend, and the Prime Minister is scheduled to push it further when he heads there on Wednesday.
Trade agreements are one thing, and we have seen really great numbers, but what more can we be doing to help Canadian businesses enter into any of the 27 member states that's here in the European Union?
The Prime Minister's day ended with a private dinner at the official residence of French President Emmanuel Macron. And while it was a meal between like-minded leaders trying to cement their legacies, Trudeau could be in for tougher company tomorrow at the summit, as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi are set to be in attendance. Rachel Aiello, CTV News, Paris.
As Donald Trump continues to muse about absorbing our country into the U.S., the rallying cry to ignore American goods and buy local is only growing louder. But as we've been learning, that's easier said than done. CTV's Garrett Berry takes a look at the challenges on the East Coast.
Some of the finest selections in the city are on the shelves of this boutique downtown butcher. Many of them high-quality cuts imported from PEI. Not raised in Newfoundland.
And we try to do it as much as possible, but it is quite seasonal. I don't know if there's anyone who's doing it like full-blown year-round.
Starting this week, consumers across the province are seeing these new Buy from Newfoundland and Labrador signs, part of a broad cross-country response to the ongoing trade tensions.
Advertising works, right? You know, your eye is drawn to it. You'll have a different thought process when you're selecting a product. That's the idea.
But buying local in Newfoundland and Labrador is not the easiest job. This week's forecast, with a February blizzard bearing down, starts to show why this province is heavily reliant on imported fruits and vegetables. It's also a question of capacity. A small population doesn't have all the same services and supply chains as some of its bigger counterparts.
Whether it's subsidized or whatever, if the farmers could get a better feed and we could really nurture these kind of programs to really rear animals in the best way possible, get the grades where they need to be.
Chinched, a deli and meat supplier in St. John's, has some products in a few local grocery stores. Owners say there's more steps governments can take to help producers go from small retail to big chains.
Perhaps you need a brand new piece of equipment in order to scale up. Well, perhaps there's grant money there, or easier access to loans or low interest loans, like that kind of thing. Maybe there's infrastructure like warehouse buildings.
There are plans in the works for a local certification program. The provincial government is in the middle of creating a set of standards that local producers could meet in order to get a verified made in Newfoundland and Labrador logo on their packaging.
Business owners say this moment of trade tension is definitely an opportunity to strengthen local production and distribution and help entrepreneurs stand a cut above. Garrett Berry, CTV News, St. John's.
Want to figure out what products are Canadian and which ones aren't? A couple of creative Canadians are coming to the rescue with some high-tech help. We'll show you how it works a little later. Troubling allegations are hanging over a private school for young boys in Ontario. Claims that staff there have allegedly abused students. That has now resulted in a string of lawsuits. CTV's Kamal Karamali spoke exclusively with one alleged victim who wants to ensure what he says happened to him never happens to anyone else.
It's an Ontario-based boarding school that prides itself on inspiring young boys, but Robert Land Academy south of Hamilton now combating allegations of abuse and humiliation.
It's obviously, still affecting me.
This former student whose ID is protected under a court-ordered publication ban says his 3 years at the school in the late 90s was a nightmare that haunts him to this day.
It made me feel like just less of a human. It made me feel depressed and alone and isolated.
He's now suing the school for $3.5 million, claiming his supervising student began unwanted and non-consensual sexual activities with him. That same year, that same student allegedly escalated his sexual assaults, demanding oral sex.
When he finally was able to come forward with it, he was accused of having brought it on himself. He was treated as though he had somehow instigated it.
His letters home filled with pleas, begging for help from his parents, who eventually pulled him out of the school. But he may not be alone. There have been multiple lawsuits from former students claiming staff physically abused and humiliated them.
The allegations of abuse go up to at least 2010. So we have heard of patterns of abuse that don't appear to have been isolated.
His hope now, putting the military-style school on notice with this latest suit, might force some real change.
You ask anybody that was there with me, it happened to them, it happened to me. I don't know how to fix a school that's completely broken.
Robert Land Academy tells CTV News these alleged incidents don't reflect the values of the school and has now put one of the staff members on leave. Heather.
Kamal Karamali reporting from Toronto. At least a dozen people have been hurt in a massive explosion at a Pennsylvania manufacturing plant. A fire broke out in the chemical plant this morning, leading to an explosion. The injuries are said to be non-life-threatening. It prompted a widespread emergency response. Pope Francis appeared in public for the first time since he was diagnosed with bronchitis on Thursday. The pontiff held an outdoor Jubilee Mass, but just a few words into his homily, he asked an archbishop to read the rest, citing breathing difficulties. A new Super Bowl champion has been crowned.
For the second time, the Vince Lombardi Trophy is headed to Philadelphia. Eagles fly in Super Bowl 59.
The Philadelphia Eagles' dominant defense denied the Kansas City Chiefs a three-peat. The Eagles won 40-22. This is the Eagles' second Super Bowl win in the team's history. Coming up, from a dream honeymoon to a travel nightmare.
Stuck 4 days longer, and then pay out of pocket to get home because you can't trust your airline.
Raising the alarm for air passenger rights. Plus, how this blind artist married technology and talent to make music. Another airline is eliminating free carry-on bags for passengers flying on its lower fare tickets. Starting Tuesday, passengers on Air Transat's Eco Budget and Promo classes will have to pay up to $50 to check their luggage on flights within North and South America. It's also cutting one free checked suitcase for its next lowest fare class, Eco Standard. The airline says this move allows it to offer more competitive fares. A Saskatchewan couple is sharing a travel nightmare tonight, forced to unexpectedly extend their honeymoon and pay even more just to get home. It's raising more concerns over air passenger rights. CTV's Alison Bamford explains.
It was a dream honeymoon that turned into a nightmare for a couple trying to get home. Cody and Chelsea Williamson spent the last week of January in Cancun. They were supposed to fly home last Thursday with WestJet.
Kind of delay, and then it canceled the first flight on us.
They say a maintenance issue grounded their plane. The flight was rescheduled for the next day, then the next, and the next.
Who would think that you'd be stuck 4 days longer, and then pay out of pocket to get home because you can't trust your airline?
The Williamsons say they were held up in Cancun for 4 extra days. They eventually booked with Air Canada to get home instead of risking another cancellation.
I would say the biggest issue that I'm observing, apart from misleading passengers, is the airline's refusal to rebook passengers on competitor airlines.
Under Canada's air passenger rights regulations, airlines must rebook passengers on a flight within 9 hours of their original departure time. If that's not possible, they must look to other airlines, including competitors. The Canadian Transportation Agency is hoping to clarify airlines' obligations with proposed amendments to the regulations released in December. But some say the new wording may be problematic.
What they are essentially doing is they are labeling the vast majority of flight disruptions as exceptional circumstance, and they say, problem solved.
CTV News reached out to WestJet regarding the Williamsons' flight. The airline says it's looking into it. For now, the couple plans to submit a compensation claim. If passengers aren't happy with an airline's response, they can submit a complaint with the Transportation Agency. But that could be a slow process as the agency sifts through a backlog of complaints. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
Still ahead tonight. The new app helping shoppers figure out how to buy Canadian. The Buy Canadian approach can at times be a challenge to figure out what's actually made in this country. That's where a couple of clever Canadians come in. CTV's Miriam Valdez-Carletti shows you their solution.
With many Canadians looking to shop local amid possible tariffs from the U.S., William Boytink ran into an issue.
I was trying to figure out if what we were eating was Canadian, and I had to jump through like 4 hoops to try and figure it out. And then I came up with the idea on the spot, being like, what information does a barcode give me?
He and Matthew Sotheby decided to create the Shop Canadian app. With a quick scan on your phone, it will tell you if a product is Canadian made or not, using a product standardization database.
We have close to 10,000 companies already registered, and I think at this point close to 15,000 products, unique products scanned.
The app utilizes a rating system for customers to use by collecting crowdsourced information.
Right, we can go in, rate it 1 maple leaf because it's made in the USA, we'll save it, and then when the next person comes in and scans it, it updates. It's not Canadian.
Since the talk of tariffs with the U.S. began, Canadians are spending more time checking labels to find out where a product is made, something the Angus Reid Institute says shows a renewed sense of pride in being Canadian.
You've got Canadians reacting quite strongly and profoundly
to the rhetoric and the belligerence of the Trump White House.
Their study found since December, both pride and deep emotional attachment to Canada have gone up 10%. President Shashi Kurl says the Shop Canadian app is one way people can show their pride.
I think you're going to see a lot more small micro examples of this as people try to find creative ways to buy Canadian.
While the app was created in Edmonton, downloads across the country show a united front from coast to coast to coast. Miriam Valdez-Carletti, CTV News, Edmonton.
Still ahead tonight. The woman realizing and sharing her musical dream. Before we go tonight, we want to introduce you to an incredible and inspiring artist from BC, one who's not letting a physical challenge silence her dreams. Here's CTV's Adam Sawatsky.
Before we see where she's going, Justine Wack hears where she's headed by listening to her clicking.
The sound bounces back at me, and I can kind of figure out what I'm hearing based on those echoes.
Well, learning echolocation has allowed Justine to hear what's generally surrounding her.
Cars or buildings or trees.
She now uses wireless earbuds and AI glasses.
So we got the camera like right here.
To tell her what specifically is.
What do you see over this direction? So it's a large mural. It has what appears to be ocean waves on it.
Although Justine doesn't really know what waves look like because she's been blind since birth.
So I've never seen in my life.
She does absolutely know her musical notes because she was born with perfect pitch.
And so the reason that we figured that out is because 2-year-old me had a Simon Cowell-esque temper tantrum because none of the other little 2-year-old children were singing in the correct key.
Justine wrote her first song on guitar at 7 after teaching herself how to play piano.
All the different keys on my computer keyboard become a music keyboard.
And now composes beats and records vocals using a music studio that fits in her backpack to produce music professionally.
I decided from a young age that I was going to build my own businesses because then nobody could tell me that I couldn't do the jobs that I knew I could do.
So now, thanks to a strong work ethic, accessible technology, and innate talent, Justine writes and performs empowering pop music under the name Justine on Green.
And so my goal is just to make as positive of an impact on the world as I can.
Which is why Justine also runs a management company to champion overlooked artists to realize their goals too.
You got to make a life for yourself no matter what's going on because you only got one life to live.
So no matter what adversity you're facing, Justine says, never lose sight of pursuing your dreams. Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Vancouver.
Such talent. That's our newscast for this Sunday night. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. I'm Heather Butts. Good night.